I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about a subject that I know a lot about and I was involved in at one time, and that is Jehovah's Witnesses. That's an incredible subject, and it's a really scary subject if you think about it. And if you've been in Jehovah's Witnesses or are one, you know how scary this subject can really be. And it's affecting families all over the world. And so many people are just not prepared to know and deal with the truth. And it's really an extraordinary story of how Jehovah's Witnesses happen to come about and what they're doing now and where they're going as an organization and as a people. And I feel that there's something very, very frightening on the horizon coming for Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's why I'd like to talk about a little bit tonight. Because I feel Jehovah's Witnesses are, as an organization and as a people, are a fine people. I have no problem with the people. But the governing people, and the individual congregations, the older men of the congregation, they refer to them as elders. The elders of Jehovah's Witnesses, I've been all through Jehovah's Witnesses. I know all about them, and I know many things about them that most people will never know. And especially Jehovah's Witnesses and the elders would never be told. I've been involved with them for some time, a long time ago.
Well, let me ask you right there, because you said you've been involved with them. Somebody listening to this might say, "What was Jordan a Jehovah's Witness, or was he just?" Okay. So you were actually a Jehovah's Witness at one time.
Yeah, at one time, a long time ago, when I was younger. Yes, and at 19, 20, and 21, 22 years old, just a young man, I was searching for truth, and I thought they had it, and they were always very kind and very courteous, and I liked the people, and so I kind of hung out with them, and then eventually I joined them. And I had quite an experience when I began to wake up and find out who Jehovah's Witnesses really were. It really affected me deeply, as it does everyone, all the different witnesses who wake up and find out that Jehovah's Witnesses are not who they say they are. They don't have what they say they have, and they have been misled on an incredible level. And so I found out a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization, as a people. And I am amazed at how far gone the Jehovah's Witness organization really is. And so I could talk a little bit about my personal experiences with them and the things which I found out. Today, Jehovah's Witnesses are, in my opinion, falling apart at the seams. They are actually in a self-destruct mode. From what I can tell, Jehovah's Witnesses are falling apart. And the main reason why is because it was never true to start with. The things they were being taught were never true to begin with. And ultimately, if you're building a house on sand and you're not building your life on a foundation that's credible and provable, you're going to one day wake up and find out you've lived your whole life in a lie, and something which is just not true. It may sound good. It may be something wonderful that humans would like, but in point of fact, the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses are not true at all, and they have been misled and deceived.
But the big question is this. Is this year 1975 the final year, the last year before the Great Tribulation breaks and reaches its climax in the battle of the great day of God the Almighty at Armageddon?
And therefore, I feel that now the organization is going to begin to show itself for what it really is, a secret society of Freemasons who have founded the Order of Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's being operated out of London. It's being connected to Jehovah's Witnesses, or connected to MI5 and MI6, British Secret Service. It is a religio-political movement on the world stage. It's an extraordinary story of betrayal and how they have misguided so many people into believing things which are not true. And I can sit and tell you for an hour or so, I can tell you all the experiences that I have had with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I really believe it's a strange and frightening story, but I really believe that the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses is going to collapse soon. And when it does, it's going to cause a horrible repercussions sociologically for the people who are members of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're not going to believe. They're not going to believe the tragedy which is coming. Because when the organization finally falls apart and the people finally begin to see what has been there all along has not been true, has been dreamt up by Masonic orders out of London, and when you begin to see the political connections and how the organization is falling apart, and mainly due to the fact, the reason why I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are going to fall apart and collapse around the world is because of their prophecies. They have been prophesying the end of the world, the end of the time of the last days, the end times, and the end of the system of things and all that kind of thing. They've been talking about the end that was coming, and that everyone should be prepared for the end of the world coming, never realizing that this was a secret society of Freemasons. Regular people who have joined, who have been like me, impressed with the attitude of Jehovah's Witnesses, impressed with their kindness and their courtesy. And when you're 19 years old, like I was as a 19-year-old, I'm in a large city that I've never been in before. I come to California from a small city in Florida. I ended up in Los Angeles in 1959 as a 19-year-old boy. And I was living in North Hollywood working, and I had a little room. But the way I came into Jehovah's Witnesses was not like everybody else. I became very close friends with the neighbors next door to me. I was living in North Hollywood, and there was some really nice people, a nice lady in her family living next door, and they always had barbecues in the backyard. And they would always, when they would see me, they would invite me over, and I would go over and sit and have lunch with them or dinner. And I enjoyed their company, and they always were very kind and courteous to me. And then one day, one evening, the lady asked me, she said, why don't you come and live here at our place? Because, if you've got a room there, just come over here. I've got 3 or 4 bedrooms that are empty. You can come live here with us. And I was always over there having dinner with them in the evenings, and I was, always visiting with them, and they would do favors for me, and I'd run errands for them. And then I discovered that they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I went with them to some of the meetings, and the other people there, they were very nice too. And so as a 19-year-old kid, I just kind of fell into being a Jehovah's Witness. I liked all the ambience. I liked the idea that the people around me were good and decent and dependable and honest, etc. Like everybody else, I was taken in. But because of my curiosity that I was inborn in me to begin to research and study everything, I began to very quickly start reading into the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, where they came from, and doing all the research on religion and theology.
Right.
And then eventually, when I got involved, I began to see what everybody else who has been an ex-Jehovah's Witness, I began to see little cracks of hypocrisy and double standards, where the men who were leading the organization or the elders in the congregation were not very well informed. They weren't very well read. They didn't really know much about the history of religions. They didn't know anything about the history of the ancient religions of the Middle East. They were not very well read about much of anything. They just were very important people, and whatever they said was the absolute law. And so I began to see things I didn't like. I don't like people who are going to be giving me orders and telling me what I can do and what I can't do. And they don't even have half the education that I do. They have no idea about the theology they're preaching. And then the more I began to suspect there was something wrong, I began to look deeper into the real foundations of where Jehovah's Witnesses came from. And boy, when I did that, I opened up a can of worms that just affected me terrible. It affected my whole life, because I began to see who they really were and where they really come from and what they were actually doing as a cult. The people didn't know, but the elders, the men who were guiding the organization, they were guiding the organization as a corporation. They had a business. It was like a business to them, and they were protecting their position in the business, in the company, and they were protecting each other. And they had double standards, and they would lie, and they would cheat. And so I began to see that double standard, and then the more I saw it, the more I knew I've got to find out more about this organization I'm involved in, because I love the people I live with. They're very kind and courteous to me, and they've been very helpful. But on the other hand, they don't know what I know. They have been involved with Jehovah's Witnesses for so long. And me, I'm more a free-thinking individual that wants to know for myself. And so I started doing outside research. And when that finally dawned on me that this is what I'm involved in, I began to quietly, shut myself off. And eventually I was finally kicked out. I was summarily just relieved of my position and told, we don't want you around here anymore. I was told, I went to New York, and I actually visited in New York with the governing body, because I was so zealous that I knew so many people in New York in the governing body headquarters. They invited me to go there, and I went to New York to visit with the governing body in New York City. And while I was there, they asked me if I would like to come to New York and go to work for the Watchtower Bible Tract Society as a researcher, because they were impressed with what I was doing and what I knew and what I was talking with them about. I didn't let them know that I knew who they were, but I thought to myself, no, you better not. You better wait. You may be getting yourself into something you don't want. So I refused to go to work at Bethel. Well, the original writings were back in 1871. That's when the original first Watchtower Society magazine came out, and it was not called Christian's Watchtower or Jesus Watchtower. It was called Zion's Watchtower. And the emphasis was always from the 1871 to the 1930s, always the emphasis was on Zion. And in the very beginning, Charles Taze Russell was in business with another man. What was his name? He was the founder of the Second Adventist, or the Seventh-day Adventist movement. William L. Miller was his name, William Miller. Eventually, Charles Taze Russell had money. He was rather wealthy. He was a very wealthy businessman. at the time, so he had a falling out with the views of William L. Miller. He had different views about Jesus and about the way things were going to happen, so he started his own movement and dropped out of the Second Adventist movement in Philadelphia. And this is why Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love, because it's not people loving each other, brotherly love. The reason why it's called Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love is because the brotherly comes from the Masonic order, the Masonic brothers. They were the brothers of the Masonic Lodge, and so they worked together. And so that's why the Bible says, that it's a city of brotherly love. Brotherly meaning a Masonic brothers, not the people. People have been, Jehovah's Witnesses have been talking about since the 1870s, talking about the end of the world, the end times, the last days and the end of the world when the whole world is going to be destroyed. 1889 and 1890, and then it was supposed to happen in 1914, and then it was supposed to, and then they came out with new revelations about, no, it's not going to be 1914, it's going to be 1929 or 25, or 1940 something is going to be the end of the world, right. And then they finally came out big. The Watchtower Society finally made a big to-do about the year 1975. That's when the whole world was going to end, in the fall of 1975. And so there was a big push to go out and get all the members you could, and the members should get rid of their property, sell their property, and donate money to the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, because you're not going to need your property after 1975. You're not going to need it in 1976 because it's not going to be here.
Right.
The end of the world is coming. Well, that was back in 75, and that was the big one. That's the big final conclusion to the whole world. Well, we're still here, and we're still talking about the end of the world, and Jehovah's Witnesses are finally beginning to catch on that something is wrong. Right. We've been talking about the end of the world since the 1880s and 1975, and here we are at 2019. It's still here. Jehovah's Witnesses were to provide knowledge and to prepare the people for a common Zionist New World Order.